never easy. Walker came up in that world, and from early on, the confidence was there. That swagger you would later see on national television, the way he played without fear and talked without hesitation, that did not come out of nowhere. It was built in him long before the bright lights. But this is not just a basketball story. This is a cautionary tale about money, about fame, and about the people who gather around a star when the checks are big and disappear when the checks stop coming. It is about how a man can have everything the world tells him to want and still lose almost all of it. Before the millions and before the bankruptcy filing, there was a college kid in Kentucky who made a decision most people thought was too soon. When Antoine Walker arrived at the University of Kentucky, he stepped into one of the proudest programs in all of college basketball. And he did not just take up space, he made his mark fast. In 1996, Walker was part of a Kentucky team that climbed all the way to the top, winning the NCAA championship. That title still stands as one of the defining moments of his early life. A young man from Chicago holding up a national championship before he could even legally rent a car. The coach steering that Kentucky ship was a fiery, demanding leader named Rick Pitino. Remember that name, because the relationship between Walker and Pitino was about to become one of the most important threads in his entire career. Pitino saw something in Walker, the versatility, the scoring touch, the fearlessness, and he pushed him hard. Then came the decision. After just 2 seasons in Lexington, only his sophomore year, Walker decided he was done waiting. He declared for the NBA draft. Now, in that era, leaving college after 2 years was a real gamble. Plenty of people thought he should stay, develop, finish what he started. But Antoine Walker had always been a young man who bet on himself. And this was the biggest bet of his life so far. He was wagering his future on the belief that he was ready for the best players on the planet. On draft night in 1996, the Boston Celtics, one of the proudest franchises in the league, called his name 6th overall. And they were about to need him more than anyone expected. Getting drafted 6th overall by the Boston Celtics should have been a dream landing. The Celtics carry more history than almost any team in sports. Banners in the rafters, championship legacy, the whole tradition. But the team Antoine Walker walked into in 1996 was not that proud old powerhouse. It was a franchise in trouble. That 1996 through 97 Celtics season turned into a disaster. The team finished 15-67. Read that again. 15 wins, 67 losses. The worst record in the entire history of the franchise. For a young man stepping into the league, that is about as rough a welcome as it gets. But here is the thing about Antoine Walker. Even inside that wreckage, he shined. As a rookie, he led that Celtics team in both scoring and rebounding. He was not hiding from the moment. He was carrying a sinking ship on his shoulders. His play earned him all-rookie first-team honors, a real recognition that the kid from Chicago belonged. That is the contradiction that would follow Walker for much of his career. Individual brilliance wrapped inside team struggle. He could put up numbers. He could fill a stat sheet. He could give you everything he had. But winning, real winning, was going to take more than one young star fighting alone. The man who had recruited him to Kentucky was about to follow him to Boston, and that reunion would turn Antoine Walker into an all-star. Sometimes the right voice changes everything. For Antoine Walker, that voice belonged to Rick Pitino, the same coach who had led him to a national championship at Kentucky. When Pitino arrived in Boston to take over the Celtics, the connection between the two of them was rekindled, and Walker's game took off. Under Pitino, Walker flourished in a way that made the rest of the league take notice. He made his first All-Star game, putting up serious numbers: 22.4 points per game and 10.2 rebounds per game. Those are the stats of a genuine star, a do-it-all forward who could score, rebound, and run the floor. The young man who had bet on himself was now collecting on that bet in a big way. And it was not just the numbers. It was the flair, the swagger, the personality. Antoine Walker played with a confidence that made him fun to watch and impossible to ignore. He became a face of the game, marketable and recognizable. That fame reached a level few players ever touch when he landed on the cover of NBA Live 99, putting his image right into living rooms and game consoles across the country. This was Antoine Walker arriving, fully as a star. The fame was rising fast, but in 1997, a civil lawsuit would put his name in headlines for reasons that had nothing to do with basketball. With rising fame comes rising scrutiny, and we have to be careful and clear about this next part. In 1997, Antoine Walker's name appeared in connection with a civil lawsuit. According to reporting from major media of that era, Walker was one of several individuals named in that civil matter, and the reporting indicated the case was settled. Now, let us be precise about what this was and what it was not. This was a civil lawsuit, not a criminal case. No criminal charges against Antoine Walker are documented in connection with this matter in the public records available. He was not the only person named, and the case was reported as settled rather than resolved through any criminal court. We mention it here only because it was a documented chapter in his public life during that time, a moment when his name was in the news for something far removed from the basketball court. It is part of the larger picture of a young star whose growing fame meant his name now traveled in places and ways he could not always control. That is the double edge of celebrity. The same spotlight that makes you famous can turn on you in an instant. On the court, though, his best basketball was still ahead, and the 2001 through 2002 season would bring Boston something it hadn't seen in years. Every great career has that one season where everything clicks, where the talent, the timing, and the team all line up. For Antoine Walker, that season came in 2001 through 2002. This was the peak. This was the moment when the kid from Chicago took a proud old franchise and dragged it back to relevance. The Celtics finished that year with a record of 49 wins and 33 losses. After years of struggle, Boston was finally winning again. And not just winning, but reaching the playoffs for the first time in 7 years. Think about that drought. 7 years without playoff basketball in a city that lives and breathes the Celtics. And Walker was right at the center of breaking it. What made that season so special was how complete Walker was. He did not just score. He tackled defense. He crashed the boards to get offensive rebounds. He drove to the lane for tough layups. Walker was one of those players who could play any position. He could do anything, and he did it all for one reason: to win. That year, he finished first on the team in rebounds, and first in assists, and second on the team in scoring. He was the engine, grabbing boards, setting up teammates, putting the ball in the basket. He was doing a little bit of everything, and the team rode that all-around game deep into the spring. Right alongside him stood a young Paul Pierce, and together, those two formed one of the most exciting tandems in the league. They pushed the Celtics all the way to the Eastern Conference Finals, 4 wins away from the NBA Finals. But that is where the run came to an end. New Jersey proved to be the stronger team, closing out the series in 6 games. It was a heartbreaking finish, but make no mistake, this was the high point of Antoine Walker's basketball life. He was at the top of his game and earning serious money. But the spending habits forming behind the scenes would later become legendary, and not in a good way. Now, we get to the part of the story that turns a basketball career into a cautionary tale. Because while Antoine Walker was earning enormous sums on the court, something else was happening away from it. A whole financial world was forming around him, and that world had a hunger that never stopped. Across his career, Walker pulled in more than $108 million in NBA salary. That is generational wealth. That is the kind of money that should set up a man, his children, and his grandchildren for life. But money like that does not just attract opportunity, it attracts people. Friends, family, advisors, hangers-on, all gathered around the star, all with their hands open, all depending on the next check coming in. In later interviews, Walker spoke openly about how it all unfolded. He described a lifestyle built on generosity, supporting an entourage, and constant financial demands. He was the provider. He was the one everyone leaned on. When you grow up the way he did and suddenly find yourself with that kind of fortune, it can feel like the natural thing to do, to take care of everybody, to say yes, to spread it around. But here is the trap. An athlete's entire universe, the houses, the cars, the people, the lifestyle, runs entirely on the checks continuing. As long as the salary keeps flowing, the whole machine hums along. The moment that income stops, the machine starts to break down. And nobody in that surrounding world tends to plan for that moment, least of all the young man at the center of it. Walker was generous to a fault, and that generosity, combined with heavy personal spending, was quietly setting up problems that no amount of scoring could fix. He had built an entire universe around himself, and in August 2005, a record-breaking trade would suddenly move that universe to a new city. In August 2005, Antoine Walker became part of basketball history, though not the kind that gets a banner raised. He was moved from Boston to Miami in a blockbuster deal so enormous it has been described as the largest trade in NBA history. Let those details sink in. This was a 5-team trade involving 13 players. 5 franchises, 13 players, all shuffled around in one massive transaction. Trades happen all the time in the NBA, but a deal of that size is almost unheard of. A logistical monster that took the league's front offices into uncharted territory. And right in the middle of it all was Antoine Walker, packing his bags and heading south. For Walker, this trade marked the end of an era. His primary run as a Boston Celtic, the team that drafted him 6th overall, the team he led in scoring as a rookie, the team he carried to the Eastern Conference Finals, that chapter was now closed. Boston had been his home, the city where he became a star, the place where his identity as a player was forged. And just like that, it was over. But there was a silver lining, and it was a big one. He was landing on a Miami Heat team with real championship ambitions. This was not a rebuilding project. This was a roster built to win right now, loaded with talent and hungry for a title. For a veteran like Walker, who had given everything on losing teams early in his career and fallen just short with Boston, this was a fresh shot at the one thing that had eluded him: a ring. In Miami, the swagger and the spending didn't slow down, but for one shining season, the basketball paid off in the biggest way possible. This is the mountaintop. After all the individual brilliance, after the all-star nods and the deep playoff runs that ended in disappointment, Antoine Walker finally got what every player chases. In 2006, he won the NBA championship as a member of the Miami Heat. And he did not just go along for the ride. Walker was a real contributor on that title team. In the NBA Finals, he averaged 13.8 points per game. Solid, meaningful production on the biggest stage the sport has to offer. He was not a role player hiding in the corner. He was out there making plays when it counted most. The crowning moment came in the title-clinching Game 6, played in Dallas. With a championship on the line, in a hostile building, Walker delivered 14 points and 11 rebounds, a double-double in the most important game of his life. Think about the journey that brought him to that floor. From a 15-67 rookie season in Boston to standing on the court as an NBA champion. From carrying losing teams alone to being a key piece of a winner. That night, Antoine Walker had it all. A national championship in college, and now an NBA championship as a professional. The swagger that had defined him since he was a kid in Chicago was finally backed up by the ultimate prize. He was on top of the world, holding a trophy that can never be taken from a man's resume. But life has a cruel way of testing people right when they reach the summit. He had reached the mountaintop, but in July 2007, masked men would invade his own home and remind him that nothing he had was truly safe. The championship glow did not last long before the darkness came calling. On July 9th, 2007, Antoine Walker experienced something no amount of money or fame can protect against. He was robbed at gunpoint, inside his own home. Imagine it. The place where you are supposed to feel safest, the place you worked your whole life to earn, invaded by armed men. According to public records and major sports media reports of the time, the assailants made off with close to $200,000 worth of merchandise. Among the items taken was his Mercedes, driven right out of his life by strangers with weapons. For a man who had built an entire world around success and abundance, this was a terrifying reminder of just how exposed he really was. All the wealth, all the status, all the trophies, none of it stopped masked men from walking into his home and taking what they wanted at gunpoint. It is the kind of experience that stays with a person, the kind that shakes your sense of security to the core. And looking back, this robbery feels almost like a turning point, the moment the story shifted from rising to falling. Up until now, the losses in Walker's life had been on the scoreboard. From here on, the losses would start hitting his bank account, his freedom, and his peace of mind. The robbery was only the beginning of the losses, because his playing career was quietly winding down, and the money was about to stop coming. After Miami, the basketball part of Antoine Walker's story began to quietly unravel. There is a certain cruelty in the way the NBA works. One season you are a champion, contributing big numbers in the finals, and a few seasons later, you are fighting just to stay on a roster. That is the road Walker found himself walking as the calendar turned past 2007. His role started to shrink. He bounced through later stops, including a stint with Minnesota, and the player who had once led teams in scoring and rebounding was now a veteran trying to hold on. The flair was still there in flashes, but the body and the timing of his career were both running down. The league is always looking for the next young star, and the window for an aging forward can close fast. The final chapter of his NBA life came with the Memphis Grizzlies in 2008, and it was a quiet ending, far quieter than the loud, swaggering career that came before it. Walker appeared in just 2 preseason games. When the regular season started, he remained inactive, never seeing the floor. Then on December 19th, 2008, the Grizzlies waived him. Just like that, the NBA career was over. Think about what that really meant for him. His NBA salary earnings had run from 1996 all the way through 2009, well over a decade of enormous checks flowing in. That income stream was the engine that powered everything in his life: the houses, the cars, the people, the lifestyle he had built around himself. And now, that engine had gone silent. For most working people, losing a job is hard enough, but for a man whose entire world was constructed on a star athlete's salary, the end of those paychecks was an earthquake. The machine kept demanding, but the money had stopped feeding it. With the NBA paychecks gone, the gambling debts that had been building in the shadows came due, and they would land him in handcuffs. There was another habit running quietly underneath the bright lights of Antoine Walker's career, one that the public did not fully see until it landed him in serious legal trouble: gambling. And when the paychecks dried up, the bills from that world came calling in the harshest way possible. In July 2009, Walker was charged with 3 felony counts of writing bad checks. These were not small misunderstandings. The charges were tied to gambling debts at 3 different Las Vegas casinos, reportedly totaling more than $800,000. Read that again. Over $800,000 in gambling-related debt written on checks that did not clear. He was arrested at a casino in South Lake Tahoe, far from the arenas where he once thrilled crowds. This is where you really start to see how far the ground had shifted beneath him. The same man who had once held generational wealth was now being booked over bad checks tied to the casino floor. It is a humbling, sobering picture, a fall that few of his fans could have imagined during his All-Star years. But the legal outcome was not as severe as the charges first suggested. According to reporting from the Las Vegas Sun and court records, Walker ultimately pleaded guilty to 1 felony count of passing a bad check. Under the resolution, he avoided prison time. Instead, he was placed on probation and put on a path to repay what he owed. So he did not end up behind bars. But the message was clear. The gambling, the bad checks, the arrest, these were the warning signs of a financial structure that was crumbling fast. A man does not write $800,000 in bad checks when his finances are healthy. These were the cracks before the collapse. The legal trouble was bad enough, but in May 2010, the full scale of his financial collapse would be laid bare in a court filing. Now we arrive at the heart of the cautionary tale. Everything we have talked about, the spending, the entourage, the robbery, the gambling debts, the end of the paychecks, all of it came crashing together in one devastating court filing. On May 18, 2010, Antoine Walker filed for Chapter 7 protection. And the numbers inside that filing tell the whole brutal story. He listed total assets of $4.3 million. Against that, he carried debts of $12.7 million. Do the math on that. He owed far more than he had, a haul of millions of dollars for a man who had earned over $100 million in his playing days. The filing painted a picture of a life built on borrowed weight. It listed 4 pieces of real estate, including a Miami home valued at $2.3 million. But that home carried a mortgage of $3.6 million. So even the house was underwater, owing more than it was worth. That single detail captures the whole problem. On the surface, it looked like wealth. Underneath, it was debt stacked on debt. But the most human details are the ones that really sting. The situation became so dire that a former Kentucky teammate, Nazar Muhammad, reportedly stepped in and paid half the fee of Walker's bankruptcy attorney. Sit with that. A man who once earned over $100 million needed a friend to help cover his lawyer. And then there was the ring. That 2006 championship ring, the one symbol of the mountaintop, the prize he had chased his entire life, had to be sold. The trophy that should have stayed with him forever was turned into cash to help dig out of the hole. A man who once earned over $100 million now had almost nothing. But Antoine Walker's story didn't end in the wreckage. Here is where the story turns, and where Antoine Walker separates himself from so many cautionary tales that end only in ruin. Because the man did not stay down in the wreckage. He fought his way back. First, he kept lacing up his sneakers even after the NBA was done with him. Walker signed with the NBA Development League's Idaho Stampede, willing to chase the game at a level far below the bright lights he had once known. He did not officially close the book on his playing career until April of 2012. That tells you something about the competitor in him. The same kid from Chicago who bet on himself was still betting, still grinding, long after the big money was gone. But the real comeback was not on the court. It was in his finances and in his honesty. By August 2013, Antoine Walker announced something almost no one would have believed during his lowest moments. He was debt-free. after all the losses, all the bad checks, all the debt piled on debt, he climbed out. He took responsibility, did the work, and got himself back to solid ground. And he turned his hard lessons into a new career and a message. Walker became a basketball analyst working on a network called 120 Sports, and he was later hired by the SEC